Welcome to Construction Genius, and my guest today is Marc Gravely. Marc is an attorney based out of Texas, and he is the author of the book Reframing America's Infrastructure, A Ruins to Renaissance Playbook. Marc has a deep interest in the history of infrastructure in the United States and the future of infrastructure. And since I know that contractors share a similar interest, particularly in the future of infrastructure, I thought I'd bring Marc on to discuss what's broken about the infrastructure here in America and specific things we can do to fix that, with a view to how contractors can get on the front foot, get out in front of some of the innovations that are happening so that they can take advantage of them, they can influence those innovations, and together we can do what we can to strengthen the infrastructure of our country. Enjoy my interview with Marc. Feel free to share that with other people who you think would benefit from hearing this interview. And as always, please give Construction Genius a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening and enjoy my conversation with Marc. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Marc, welcome to Construction Genius.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me, man.
It's my pleasure. You have a book out called Reframing America's Infrastructure, A Ruins to Renaissance Playbook. Your mind, as you've done a lot of thinking around this, your book is quite extensive, but why do you think our infrastructure is broken here in the United States?
Eric, a lot of it's not broken, but there's a fair amount of it that is, and probably more that is than people would like to comfortably think about. Bridges shouldn't collapse. I think that's something we can all agree on. Buildings should be energy efficient. Things should be done in a thoughtful manner. That doesn't always happen. People go about building or designing parts of the infrastructure, whether it be roads or bridges, buildings, parks, even power grids. It's all part of our infrastructure. It's the structure and the substance of our daily lives when we're outside of our homes. There's a lot of it that's right. The planning and execution on the interstate highway system was miraculous. When the federal government passed the law that said, hey, here's what we're going to do, President Eisenhower signed it into law. That increased the efficiencies that we have of transportation and transporting products. A lot of people don't really think about it like that.
Can I ask you this? Let me just take you back in time there then to Eisenhower. That's going to be in the early 50s?
Just after World War II, yeah.
Okay, just after World War II. Tell me, why do you think that went forward at that time, where when we think of infrastructure these days, all we think of is gridlock and promises? Something was supposed to happen under Trump, nothing really happened. Something's supposed to happen under Biden, nothing's happening yet. Why under Ike did it move forward?
It took the federal government and a lot of vision to get that going. But the fact is, after World War II, everyone was united.
Yeah.
And the American people, such as we were united in effort, and it was a time for fresh ideas. If you'll recall, there was a lot of technology that was used and that came out of and that was developed during and after World War II. For goodness sake, the atomic bomb, the B-2 rocket, tanks, submarines. Yep. And so people were accustomed to seeing great leaps in technology, and the idea that we could have our own American Autobahn or an extensive system appealed to people. It appealed to business. And there was the political will to get it done. And that's one of the huge reasons that got passed. I don't know what the vote was on the House floor. There's so many of those these days that don't count. The will of the people was there, and we had a leader who was allowed to lead.
So it's interesting because we were promised flying cars and all we got was an iPhone, and the iPhones are cool. I was just goofing around on the latest chat AI. It's really cool, but it's not revolutionizing or dramatically transforming people's lives. So what technologies do you think are underutilized at the moment that could have a tremendous positive impact on the building of our infrastructure or the rebuilding of it?
There's a couple things depending on the infrastructure you're talking about. For example, the Texas power grid. I'll use Texas as an example, right? It's one of our biggest states, a lot of personality. Everybody likes to watch what's going on in Texas sometimes. And the power grid was having some problems when a lot of people needed power a few winters ago. And Texas, by the way, is the only state who has a standalone power grid. And so it's a great example, both in a positive way and a negative way. the algorithms or the decision trees used to make design decisions on power grids are one big thing, maybe a more advanced version of AI that you on your app there. That can contribute to the constructive design of a power grid. Let's not forget, much of the power grid was installed decades ago, designed decades even before. An old design that doesn't really take advantage of a lot of new technology. That's one example, I think, from the question you asked.
So then let me ask you about then the political structure, and if you have any views on this. Obviously, we have the federal government, we have the state governments. Can you think of a state that is doing more positive work on infrastructure rebuilding in comparison with the other states here in America?
Sure. California is doing a lot of great things. They're trying to diversify their energy usage. They frankly lead the nation in better building techniques, more stringent code. Look, the fact is that whether you believe greenhouse gases and global warming and climate change, that aside, buildings use too much energy and they let too much of it out. So when you heat them or cool them, a lot of it escapes through the envelope. And I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my father repeatedly asked me and reminded me to close the front door because, quote, we're not heating the damn neighborhood. We're not cooling the front street. I think anyone that's ever been a grown up has had that. So that's what happens when you don't have a building that is energy efficient. And California's led the way on that. Yes, it's a little more expensive. And yes, it takes longer to build. And yes, it's a little more of a headache. But that's just one example of some things that commercial builders, both residential and commercial, have to do if we're going to lessen our energy use. I think we can all agree that using less energy is better if we can do it. I hear people all the time say, we've got 400 years worth of coal left or 2,000 years worth of oil. How about we start being more efficient now so our great grandchildren can still use some of that along with the alternative methods that get developed along the way.
I'm curious about California because I live in California, and one of the things I do is I'm in Sacramento, and so I drive down the 99 and go down to LA at times or just the Central Valley visiting my clients. And as I'm going down the southern part of the Central Valley, I see the high-speed railroad. And what I see is not the high-speed railroad, but I see this chunk of overpass that they've built, and that's all they've built. And it's out in the middle of nowhere, basically going nowhere. And to me, that's a testament of a lot of the challenges that we have with the infrastructure rebuilding or renaissance, as you call it, in America, is just the high costs. And I understand there's high costs involved with some of these regulations and stuff, but the high costs of building combined with the political gridlock. And every time we talk about infrastructure, people say, yeah, that would be nice, but Mark, it's just not happening.
I'm not going to jump on your bandwagon. Let's be fair, okay? In China, when they want to build a light rail from Beijing to Mongolia, they just do it because nobody owns any property there. Government owns the land. So when they want to dictate that gets built, well, they just do it. And we've seen great and fantastic things from Chinese construction and long-range planning. I'm sure you're familiar with the Belt and Road Initiative.
Sure.
I'm sure they're running into some financial problems, but the fact is that somebody there has had a vision to pull this damn thing off. And it's happening. Okay, they're tying themselves to their neighboring countries and building, for lack of a better metaphor, a super highway system with which to trade and travel. And we know what happens when you do that. You become greater than the sum of the parts. You tie people together with different views, different things to buy and sell, and you communicate with people. People get to go see their relatives who live in neighboring states or countries. So I need to disagree with you when you say you see part of a bridge that's been built and think gridlock. Light rail is appropriate for some areas of the country here in the United States, and it's not appropriate for others, given the population densities. And in some places, it's going to work, and in some places, it'll be built, and maybe it won't, but by gosh, we've got to try. But the first thing we have to do is negotiate with people who own the land, because is America, after all, and we take the good with the bad. We're all here together, in my view. And you've got to buy the land, and people get to protest, and people get to say, hey, what about genetic diversity and biodiversity? And that's just what happens. That's part of the wonderful fits and starts American process. It mirrors the fact that not to get too constitutional on you, but it mirrors the fact that a minority can hold something up for a bit to say, hey, are you sure? It's really the equivalent of a devil's advocate or someone, for example, the Pope, right? They always assign a cardinal to argue, the smartest one, I'm told, the one that's the most respected, to argue the opposite of the position they want to take. And that's a bit far afield, but when you see part of it hanging around, schedule aside, probable cost overruns aside, let's not forget that it's a visionary thing that we can do here. And I think ultimately they're going to help a lot of efficiencies when they're finally installed.
So let's explore that idea of vision here a little bit. The vision of the interstate highways, I think, is a pretty simple, obviously not simple to execute, but simple in its concept, something that people can grasp. The logic of it appeals to us in terms of, hey, get on the road and go from Maine to California in 3 or 4 days. That's a tremendous thing right there. How would you articulate what the vision should be for this infrastructure renaissance that you're describing in your book?
It depends on what piece you're talking about. For example, there's the cyber infrastructure. Okay. That's important. There's the energy saving parts of the infrastructure that really get passed by dictate. It's by code. There's a reason we have codes as standards. It's because they represent the minimum. Some would say a minimum to which something should be built. And so highways are easy now. Let's think about it this way. It's only been 80 years since the highway system was first started. And of course, they're always doing construction on it. Thank goodness. But it's only been 80 years. That's just a generation.
Right.
That's just one generation, man.
Yeah.
I think one of the things the federal government has done wisely in this most recent infrastructure bill is they let local control predominate. Hey, San Antonio, for example, here's $500 million. You decide how you want it spent. Here's some parameters, but you decide what your community needs. And I think that mirrors part of the genius of the founders of the United States, right? The states get to run themselves. There's a federal system, but what's acceptable in one state is not acceptable in another, and people get to vote. And that's pretty great.
I don't disagree with you there. Let's set aside the dynamic between federal and state government and local government for a moment. In your mind, what do you think is the number one infrastructure priority that America faces at the moment?
So I believe that data collection on habits and efficiencies is a valuable thing to collect. And I think that autonomous or semi-autonomous cities are the wave of the future. More people live in cities than live in the country. Smart cities, for example, sensors in a lot of places that can be connected to cars, to transportation, to walkways. The Autonomy Institute and a guy named Jeff DeCoop in Austin, Texas, a visionary. You should check out the website, no affiliation, but the dude is killing it. And if you'll take a look at it, you should have him on your show, actually. He's on LinkedIn. He's given lectures everywhere. But the Autonomy Institute has different packages that cities can select from and menus of things to incorporate. In Austin, Texas, for example, I know a lot of my examples are from Texas. I happen to live
Sure, no, it's fine.
Austin is in the midst of trying to implement some of the concepts, and it's going to help efficiencies and effectiveness. So the next level efficiencies lie in our transportation systems. People are going to move around. It's part of our fabric. There's truckers, there's flights, there's so much commerce is done along our highways and byways that the increase in efficiency in this system is something we've got to have. Even the railways, as ancient as that technology is, right? It's a railway. One of the richest men in the world bet on the railways about a decade ago. You may have heard of him, Warren Buffett.
Sure.
He knows that transportation via railway is highly their buckets that you haul stuff in.
Yep.
But you can't do that with people super efficiently. And so the car culture is not going anywhere in the U.S. Not anytime soon. So efficiency via smart cities and smart roads, I think, is the number one thing we can do. That along with energy savings in building design and building construction.
Give us a little bit more there on this idea of data collection on people's habits so that those efficiencies can be pinpointed. People's
travel habits, not personal travel habits, but the big data.
The patterns.
Travel, right? That helps us to know where we need to build highways. For example, there's a new highway being built that hooks up 2 parts of Massachusetts, and it's helping people save fuel. People aren't going to stop driving.
Right.
They're just not. The roads are efficiently built, and they can continually evolve. As to locale, that's the kind of the first step on gross observation.
Yeah.
But as we have more electric cars and more sophisticated cars that are powered differently, but with more sensors, we will be able to gather more data that will help us design better cars to get better mileage, or safety features. If you'll recall, just some years back, there weren't side airbags.
Right.
And you can probably remember a time when there were no front airbags.
Yeah, definitely.
And safeties. Yeah, of course. My grandfather used to take me around and sit me in the middle of on the console, and he smoked in the car.
Absolutely.
And there were ashtrays. Are there ashtrays in any cars you've been in lately?
Yeah, there are.
Yeah, that's about the best example I can give you of data collect, because that's not something I specifically get down to the nitty gritty in, but that's one example.
Eric, hope you're enjoying my chat with Marc here today. If we're going to be able to fix the infrastructure, it means that construction companies have to function well and efficiently. And that is a function of the efficiency and the expertise of your leadership. And that's why my book, Construction Genius, effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies, can be so useful to you. Do this. This is what a lot of people are doing. They're buying the book for themselves and people in their team, their leadership team. They then read a chapter, let's say a month together, and they discuss it in a short 30 to 45-minute meeting. And through that, they can think about how they can use and apply the strategies that I share in the book to help them to be a better leadership team. And that's the great thing about this book. It is very, very practical. If you look into the show notes, there will be links where you can click and buy the book on Amazon. There's the Kindle version, the Audible version, there's the soft cover version like I have here. And buy the book for yourself and for the people in your leadership team. You won't regret it. It's an awesome read. And now, back to my conversation with Marc. Where do you think we're making missteps in terms of our efforts to improve the infrastructure? Where are we missing the point, or where are we just banging our heads up against a wall where we're going to be like, hey, time out, this is not working?
So I'll tell you what that is. So people by nature are slow to adapt.
Sure.
And people like to be comfortable. And so where we're really missing the boat is we need some experimental expenditures to see what works and what doesn't. It's no different from Thomas Edison trying to figure out which filament works the best. He went through hundreds, and when asked, oh my gosh, you're just banging your head against the wall, he said, no, I have 400 examples I know won't work. And so we need to engage in a little more experimental design, both environmental, electronic, with buildings, with transportation, to see what does work, because only by doing that, improving the concept, can we know. It may sound silly, but the simplest thing is it's very simple, a roundabout. Yeah, roundabout, I didn't used to know them. I didn't like them. They were confusing to me, like a caveman with fire. Now I know how to use a roundabout, but 20 years ago, I'd never seen a roundabout.
Yeah, I'm from Europe, and so I'm very familiar with roundabouts. And when they're starting to come in America, and every time I see one, I get all excited. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look, another roundabout.
I know, but it was a trip. I was down in Pasadena a couple of weeks ago, and right by my friend's house, there's this really sweet roundabout. The problem is they've got stop signs. This is so dumb. They have stop signs on each one of the entrances into the roundabout, which defeats the whole purpose, more or less.
That's a great example of something new that people have to learn to utilize. It's just like your chatbot. It's new. I've used it often, and it's been awful for me. I've asked questions and they're wrong and obviously wrong. But people have to learn how to use it and make it a habit.
Yes. So that's very interesting, because you take something as relatively simple. The concept of a roundabout is a relatively simple one. It is a little counterintuitive, but then once you get it, and they can just so simply screw it up. And when we go back to World War II example, I think the reason why so much innovation happens during wartime is because of the necessity, right? We've got to figure out a way to be able to survive and kill the other guy. And so we're going to be as innovative and try stuff out and all this kind of stuff.
Something about necessity being the mother of invention. I don't know.
Yeah, there you go. So it's interesting because it seems we're stuck in this sort of a malaise, and maybe it's just my perspective and I'm off here, but where are you seeing this experimental expenditure happening that's really moving the ball down the field as it relates to infrastructure that might be pertinent to construction companies?
I wish I had more examples for you, but there is one place that isn't infrastructure focused.
Please.
That is a great experiment that is happening, that is succeeding beyond people's wildest dreams. And that is Peter Thiel's $100,000 scholarship for people who decide to skip college.
Yeah.
Take a look at what the people that they have chosen for that are achieving.
Yeah.
Take a look at that. It will blow your mind.
Yeah.
And remember, here in the United States, it's a little different from Europe. A lot of people are expected to go to college.
Yeah.
And everyone shouldn't go to college. Some people are expected to go into the trades, and some of those people shouldn't be in the trades. But the fact is that that's where much of the magic happens.
Yes.
Is the trades and the actual building of
yes.
things. Some of the most respected German tradesmen build Mercedes engines and Porsche engines, and they do it with their hands, and they innovate. Many discoveries and patents have come out of the men and women that work with their hands. So as far as successes, though, the Peter Thiel program has just been astounding. I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more press, but it's been absolutely astounding. So I wish there was a laboratory like that for infrastructure, but as it happens, the advances happen in fits and starts.
Yes.
So often, for example, building science, more efficiencies are developed at the university level.
Yes.
But they're not adopted because this is the other way that we've always done things, and it's going to cost more. And how am I going to do that? And who's going to implement that? And one of the things that has to happen is the men and women responsible for building things who get paid billions of dollars have to embrace change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have to maybe make a little less money.
Yes.
And they have to hire people that don't think like them.
Yep.
And a chief innovation officer at a general contractor. Have you ever heard of one? I don't know. Maybe there are.
They're coming in. They're not exactly named that, but there's the larger general contractors. They're beginning to very much think in these ways, very much so.
Okay, good. That's great to hear. And hiring someone that thinks differently from you in an organization like that is a big key to trying new things. And of course, the owner has to agree with you. Most owners are pretty forward thinking, and they can afford a $2 million problem if it's a choice they made that's not going to work out, but we gave it the old college try.
I would push back against that, Mark, because from talking with construction companies, one of the big challenges is I have an owner and I've got a new way of doing a project, but it's going to maybe take a little more time and cost a little bit more money. And the owner's, no, I just want my building built. And here, like in California, for instance, I know that we've got to build it to code. So it's interesting what you were saying. By regulation, there's this innovation happening because if you don't do it, then your building won't pass inspection. But many owners are just doing the bare essentials. And I think that's where it then falls back on the contractors, the GCs, and the subs to be able to be in a secure enough position where they're not just going from project to project, but they can then set aside time, money, human capital to look at these innovations and begin to think about how they can implement these kinds of changes in their business.
Architects are used to being cutting edge, right?
Yeah.
I'm an architect. You know what that means, right? Both the good and the bad. I'm an engineer. I'm here to help you. Also know that comes with good and bad. And then also, to be fair, let's be equally fair to everybody. A general contractor, we'd like to do this one a little different. How much is that going to cost me?
Yep.
Everyone's trying to do their best, but innovation can happen despite owners' reticence, I think, sometimes. But by and large, hiring people that think differently from you are something general contractors can do and still meet most of the owner's requirements from a utility standpoint.
Okay, so let's do a sort of a wave our magic wand. Let's assume by some sort of miracle that we get the funding mechanisms right. There's enough political will, vision, and leadership. And there's that balance between the federal and the states and the locals. It begins to get worked out. What are the main innovations that you see happening in the next 10 to 20 years in infrastructure that construction companies need to be aware of so that they can get ahead of the curve, so to speak, and make sure that they're there to help build those projects?
So the number one is computer-aided fill in the blank. That's a big deal. There's economies of scale that can be achieved there in some disciplines, in some respects, number one. Number two, buildings and infrastructure that doesn't use as much energy. And I'm talking about enclosures now, meant for work or manufacturing, industrial foreplay.
Yep.
So enclosures that use less energy, that's a huge thing that simply has to happen. And if we don't do it soon, we're going to have to do it at some point.
Okay.
Probably not in our lifetimes, but that's got to happen. And more energy efficiency. And I know there's LEED certifications and stuff like that, but we're beyond that now. That's a nice gold star to have. I frankly question if some of the stuff that has it is really. I don't think it is. I know it's not. But going forward, the biggest thing is the energy efficiencies. And then the other thing is, and you'll have to forgive me, I forgot your exact question, but if I could wave my magic wand, we need more skilled labor.
Yeah,
there's just not enough skilled labor. Here in Texas, I can tell you some of the most skilled craftsmen I've seen in my life come up from Mexico and then go back home. Sometimes they stay, but there's not a million of those guys, man.
Yep.
There's not. And skilled labor is something we need from people who care about the work they do. And that's the business I'm in. I see what happens when things go wrong. It's easy to know that there's just not enough skilled labor out there to get the work done.
We're always looking forward in terms of the development of technologies and new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. At the beginning of the interview, we glanced back at the 1940s and 50s with the building of the American highway system. What are some other specific lessons from the past that we might lay hold of where there was a tremendous change in terms of technology that impacted infrastructure that we should be looking at as case studies for how we should be moving forward in terms of developing our infrastructure in the present day?
So I guess your question is, if I can turn it around and rephrase it.
Please.
So what has the construction industry learned in the past that it must embrace more in the future?
Yeah. What are some examples of where there's some radical, because we talked about the highway system, that was a radical infrastructure change. What are some other radical infrastructure changes that have occurred that would be analogous to where we need to go and might help us in the way that we think about the changes we need to make?
From a power standpoint, there's been huge advances in power generation, power efficiencies. We talked a little bit about the power grids and how everybody receives their power. There's been huge innovation in wind energy.
Yep.
Sure, there's some stories about it not working out, but by and large, it is efficient. It does work out. You've seen the wind farms, I know, in California.
Yep.
There's much more to be done there with the constant motion of the sea and so far as capturing and transmitting energy. So there's a lot of that going on. It hasn't, all of which, or at least most of which, hasn't trickled down yet to a lot of folks. But what we've learned, though, is the answer is not the same for everybody when it comes to power. And so sometimes the answer may be nuclear, sometimes, which we haven't embraced, but Europe has. By the way, China's building, I think, 28 nuclear power plants in the next 5 to 7 years.
Yep.
And you can bet they'll be finished
Absolutely.
in 5 to 7 years. But where we get our power and how we get it and then how we use it is really the fundamental thing that drives every single bit of what we do. Because without power, to power the drills, to power the steam shovels, to make the steel, to help mix the concrete, it all goes back to local. And we start living in city states and villages. So without the power that we have and all the dependence we have, it's generation and delivery. You'll see nations crumble if those answers aren't sought out.
If you were to articulate, if you could, a vision for the infrastructure of the United States in a simple phrase or sentence that most people could understand, how would you do that?
We've got to do what works, what we have found works in the past, and we have to discard what doesn't. We have to be extremely utilitarian and realistic about what works and what doesn't for different parts of the country. And for that, I'm talking about every part of the infrastructure, whether it's power, whether it's roads and bridges, whether it's our waterways. We have to embrace what works and discard what doesn't, and understand that different regions and different, maybe even cities, will have different solutions, perhaps. And one size doesn't really fit all.
So let me ask you this then. How can a construction company owner, because what happens many times, I think, is that construction company owners by nature are reactive to what's coming from regulations, what's coming from the economy. And that's very appropriate. But how can a construction company owner or president become proactive in light of getting on the front foot when it comes to these infrastructure changes that are going to be occurring?
I have to start this answer by telling you that I believe folks that build stuff are a different breed, because it's always amazed me at its most basic that a person with a pickup and a shovel can build something just wonderful.
That's right.
Whether it's a house, whether it's you name it, because I've seen it happen. I've seen huge companies start off with a guy with a shovel and a pickup truck.
That's right.
And so it's miraculous. It gets down to will and it gets down to vision. And so you and I both know that every person, and I'll say guy, listening to this podcast who is in the general contracting business is focused on where's my next project coming from.
That's right.
How do I close out the last?
Yes.
That's no different than a man or a woman knowing I've got to have food and water.
Yes.
So those are the first two things, and you can't begrudge them that. But what they need to know is that if they will just somehow, some way, think about things in a little different way, maybe take a different approach from time to time, maybe the next building they build can be more energy efficient. How do they measure that? How can they brag about it? Wouldn't you like to be the first guy on your general contractor metaphorical block to build a better mousetrap, to tweak something, to figure it out? It's a tough task because in many senses, construction is a simple thing. Building envelope, although it can be an engineered structure, it's not complicated. There's no weight to thrust ratio that needs to be calculated like when you're launching a rocket. Make friends with the local university construction science guys.
There you go.
Talk about what they've heard of.
Yep.
Go to dinner with them. Those are friends that will broaden your horizon. You could hire them as a little bit of a consultant here and there. They'd like that. You certainly got the money for it because there's a tremendous amount of money to be made in building stuff, which is great. And I would say get to be friends with your local university building science guy. Pick a couple that you like or gal and ask them, let them be the person that helps you think differently.
I think it's interesting, too, that the best contractors I find or the most innovative ones are the ones who they embrace the political realities that we've been describing here. And they really seek to build relationships at the local level, the state level, and if possible at the federal level so that they can have at least some influence through associations or through their personal relationships that can help to drive some of that infrastructure spending in a particular direction.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Those are the most effective because they have people skills. They can see over the horizon. And in its most basic level, it's send some money our way so we can build some cool stuff for the people that live near me.
Yeah, true. Yeah, that's right. Mark, tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and how people can get in touch with you.
Eric, I'm a lawyer. I have a national practice, and all I do in that practice is two things. I represent owners. I don't represent general contractors. I don't represent architects or engineers. I only represent owners for construction defects and delays. and I only work on a contingent fee basis. I'm the only lawyer of my type that I know of. And the second part of my practice is I also represent owners, institutional owners, large property owners against their insurance companies when they have a covered insurance loss and the insurance company won't make them whole. Let me tell you what, we are busy. We are busy. I represent high rises, museums, large hospital systems. And so the key to what I do is on the construction defect side is I help the general contractor's liability insurance carrier understand that it needs to pay. We're typically not after what I call the general contractor's real money. Got some retainage or hold back the road. I'm not there to get that, but I know how to trigger the insurance coverage they have to make it as least painful as I can for everybody.
Sure.
So I know you've heard me say glowing things about general contractors today, wonderful architects and wonderful engineers, and there's many good people. And just because you make a mistake doesn't mean you're a bad person, of course, because people do make mistakes. And that's why we have insurance. So my job is recovering cost of repair for owners for non-conforming work.
Tremendous. And then how did that all lead to you writing that book, Reframing America's Infrastructure?
We represent owners all the time in all facets, large projects, massive projects, medium projects. And it just began to come together for me that the infrastructure here in America is such an important part of everything we do. It's such a part of our nation. And I knew a lot of examples of poor construction.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, one reviewer, you can go to Kirkus Reviews and read the review, which is easier than reading the book. So I'd encourage you to go to Kirkus and check out the review. But Kirkus says that Gravely cites an unnerving number of examples of poor construction. And that's just the stuff that makes it to the news. There's 1,000 footnotes. There wasn't a book out there like this. And if you can find one, I'd love to see it. But it was my COVID project, I guess I could say. And so I decided to write a book about the soaring vision of what America's infrastructure could be. Talk about a little bit about the history of infrastructure in ancient societies. There's still Roman bridges standing today that are used. I talk about a lot of problems because it's popular. So I talk about a lot of construction problems. There's a bunch of examples. Then I talk about some of the visionaries that will help pull us through this. Dr. Michael Larrañaga, who helped calculate risks of multiple pipelines in the Western U.S. Jeffrey DeCoux from Autonomy Institute are some of the visionaries I talk about in the book.
That's excellent. And how can people get in touch with you?
They can email me, mgravely@gravely.law. You can go to gravely.law. I've got a new website popping up in about 30 days. But people are free to email me with questions. I've got a couple of free books on the site they can download. One is called Construction Quality Audits. It's free to download. It's a service, free service we offer to owners. We'll come in after a building's finished, after the punch list, and do a quality audit and then give a report to the owner.
That's cool.
And then there's another book or two about how to pursue hospital defects, cost of repair recovery.
Excellent. Last question I have. I know that you've litigated before the Texas Supreme Court a number of times. Tell us your most interesting experience while you were doing that.
I have. So we represented policyholders against insurance companies for property damage at the Supreme Court, either as amicus counsel or party counsel, about that many times. One of my most interesting cases was we represented a group of trade groups, and the insurance industry was trying to get some policy language changed so they didn't have to pay as much money. And so our clients included the Texas Hospital Association, Texas Hotel and Lodging Association, at that point, the Texas Apartment Association, cities and counties, even the independent bankers, to let the Supreme Court know that please don't give in to the industry. People pay billions in premiums every year in Texas. Please don't rule the way they were ruling. And so we were able to greatly influence the court and bring some gravitas, I like to think, to bear to let everyone know what all these property-owning trade groups thought, who spent billions of dollars a year in premiums.
Excellent. Well, Marc, I really appreciate you joining me today on Construction Genius. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes to your website and to your book. And thanks again for giving us your insights here today.
Thanks, Eric. Take care, man.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Hey, this is Eric. Thank you for listening to my interview with Marc Gravely. Make sure you check out his book, Reframing America's Infrastructure, A Ruins to Renaissance Playbook. There are links in the show notes to the book and to Marc's website. Feel free to connect with him. And as always, share the show with other people who you think would benefit from listening to it. Appreciate you listening to Construction Genius, and I'll catch you on the next episode.